Hi everybody, my name is Crystal Cantu and I'm here to bring you information on brain injury and resources that you may find in our community. A little bit about me. I am one of New Mexico's first brain injury specialists that gets certified in the state of New Mexico. When I first got certified, there was about 11 of us. Today, we've worked really hard with ARCA's ABI division to bring that certification to over 40 participants within the state of New Mexico, and we continue to offer this training quarterly. I've been in the field of brain injury for over 20 years, working in multiple programs throughout the state, from developmental disabilities to mental health programs. And I'm here today to bring you information on brain injury. Now, this is a silent epidemic that most people don't notice. It's going to impact all of our communities in multiple ways. It's a non-discriminatory disability, so it impacts people that look just like me and you. Brain injury was slated to be the #1 disability by 2020 until the COVID pandemic hit and all the attention and focus got put onto helping us be healthy and safe within our community. Brain injury is often called a silent epidemic because many of the problems that result from a brain injury are not going to be readily apparent to the outside world. It's often not identified and frequently misdiagnosed. Not only is it misdiagnosed, but a lot of people working with survivors of brain injury don't often have the education behind them to recognize brain injury and the impact that it has on a person's cognitive functioning. And so appropriate treatment at the right time in the right doses in the right frequency is not readily available within the state of New Mexico. But don't worry, we're working really hard on it. And it takes an uphill climb for families who aren't usually prepared for this level of disability. The effects of brain injuries, such as changes in thinking, are not going to be apparent to the outside observer. Very frequently, it's seen as a mental health illness rather than a cognitive functioning deficit. And so it's important to recognize that brain injury is going to impact a person in all life areas, from their home and living environment and how those relationships are stressed and changed, to the way they work or the way they learn, to their community participation and ability to engage in appropriate social interactions, along with those personal relationships that often those intimate ones are going to take the biggest toll in a person's life. Those are what I consider a natural support network that's imperative in helping these people move through and learn to grow with their new way of living. When we look at the definition of brain injury, acquired brain injury, as we refer to it in the brain injury world, is an injury to the brain that's not hereditary, it's not congenital, degenerative, or induced by birth trauma. Often, should that occur, you're dealing with something called an intellectual developmental disability. With an acquired brain injury, this is going to happen after birth with presumed normal brain development that precedes the injury. It's going to result in a change in the neuronal activity, affecting the physical integrity, the metabolic activity, or the functional ability of nerve cells. Acquired brain injury gives us kind of an umbrella definition to work with. It's going to include injuries that are caused by external physical forces that are applied to the head, as well as those internal insults to the brain. And so when we look at those injuries caused by external physical forces, these are often referred to as traumatic brain injuries. Okay, a traumatic brain injury is when there's an alteration in brain function or other evidence of brain pathology that's caused by an outside force. Traumatic impact injuries happen when the head is struck by an object or the head strikes an object, which can result in either a closed injury, often referred to as a non-penetrating injury. With these types of injuries, it can be focal, meaning in one location, or it can be diffuse, meaning it's more widespread, which is very often more difficult to diagnose, treat, and support because of the way it impacts cognitive functioning throughout the brain. It can also be an open or penetrating injury. With penetrating injuries like a knife through the head or sometimes even a gunshot wound, can be more focal injury, meaning that you can identify the area that it happens. Some of the causes of brain injuries, traumatic brain injuries, include falls. That's actually your number one cause of most traumatic injuries. It can include motor vehicle accidents, and a lot of those you get what's called the coupe-contra-coupe effect, where the head might impact on the front of the forehead. However, the brain, which sits in a sack of water, then ricochets back and has a secondary impact behind the head, causing what we know as a diffused anoxal injury. And the deficits for that person are going to be more widespread and impact several areas of that person's life. You also get child abuse. Shaken baby syndrome is another coupe-contra-coupe type injury. Assaults like gunshot wounds, domestic violence. Domestic violence, we do have to do a lot more screening when it comes to domestic violence. You can get closed and open injuries. Domestic violence usually occurs when somebody is strangled or receives a blow to the head, which results in anoxic brain injuries or that traumatic impact injury. Studies do show that 67% of domestic violence victims do have symptoms related to brain injury. And so a lot of work is being done currently, a lot of research being done currently in domestic violence shelters and settings to help improve the outcomes for victims dealing with domestic violence. Then you get sports and recreation injuries. We heard everything about the NFL, and I think the NFL actually brings a lot of light to head injuries with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. You also get a lot of concussion protocols now put into high school athletics and youth sporting programs that are teaching parents and children both about concussion protocol and safety that needs to happen when dealing with a mild brain injury. In fact, 75% of all head injuries fall into a mild brain injury category. Then we look at workplace injuries, which the number one injury is going to be falls. And then military actions, and you have Veterans Affairs doing a lot of work looking at head injuries, as we saw as an outcome and a result of the Gulf Wars and bringing back our younger veterans and giving them the supports and services that they need. When we look at non-traumatic injuries, these are often referred to as acquired brain injuries, right? But remember, that acquired brain injury is an umbrella definition. When we talk about non-traumatic injuries, we're talking about non-contact injuries or internal insults to the brain. With non-contact injuries, these happen when the brain moves within the skull through rotational or angular forces, like the coupe-contra-coupe effect that I talked about earlier. Primarily diffused or multifocal injuries are a result of those rotational or angular forces that you see with motor vehicle accidents, assaults, things like that. When we talk about internal insults, these are the ones that we are more commonly introduced to with strokes, right? This is where the brain has a severe reduction in blood flow or hemorrhages due to clotting. And with those types of injuries, those can be either focal or diffused. You see a lot of stroke patients talk about the area that their stroke happened. Okay, when we look at the causes of these, stroke is going to be one of the number one reasons. Then you get infectious diseases. Anytime you see that word encephalitis, that's going to kind of alert you that there is an infection that occurred in the brain. Then you get seizures disorders. Prolonged seizures can actually cause a loss of oxygen, and that loss of oxygen can result in a diffuse anoxal injury and worsen the seizure activity for that patient. We get into electric shocks and lightning strikes. Tumors, not only the tumor itself that can cause damage, which over time, a slow-growing tumor, a person may not recognize the damage to their cognitive functioning, but having surgery or going through radiation to remove that tumor can actually have a negative impact, and it's a very risky surgery for somebody to get a tumor removed, especially in the brain. You get toxic exposure, which is one that we deal with quite a bit here in New Mexico when we look at our substance abuse rates and the impact that that has on individuals and the resulting factors. We've got to take into consideration the person and the impact this injury might have, and not just the repetitive addictive behaviors that the person experiences and that we deal with. You get metabolic disorders like insulin shock, diabetic coma, liver or kidney disease, neurotoxic poisoning, which I was really pleased to see AFD did do a little shout out on not warming up your house with your ovens or leaving your car on in a garage, because we see a lot of brain injuries due to those activities. And then anytime there's a lack of oxygen to the brain, anything to do with near drowning, airway obstruction, that strangulation, heart attacks is one that I see very frequently dealing with the loss of oxygen, causing that anoxic brain injury or hypoxia when there's a reduced level of oxygen going into that brain. Now, when we look at the system of care for a person dealing with the brain injury, it's very typical that the person goes into an acute care hospital and receives that life-saving treatment and stabilization of their medical conditions. Then a person should enter into what's called an acute rehab, where they receive intensive rehab that will stabilize those basic functionings needed to live. With a brain injury, we do hope that a person gets into what's called a post-acute neuro rehab facility. And with these types of facilities, treatment is planned and provided within a framework of a systematic process that focuses on not only the medical need, but also the cognitive need that a person with the brain injury requires. We do not have a post-acute neuro rehab within the state of New Mexico. We are just barely forming these things, and it's Loveless and UNM just entered into an agreement and now have developed the first ever post-acute neuro rehab jointly together. Now we finally have, which was a work in progress, a residential rehab program through ARCA's ABI division that now has 2 fully licensed residential neuro rehab programs that I'll talk to you a little bit later in the presentation. For a lot of New Mexicans, we take the person from that acute rehab setting like Loveless Rehab Center or Encompass Health is where oftentimes people will go. AMG Specialty Hospital is another one that people go to. We often take them home and we do family or in-home supports. Keep in mind, most families are not educated on the needs of persons living with brain injury. And so education becomes a big piece in this rehab process. When you're dealing with the brain injury, it's important to understand that a brain injury does not only impact the person who obtains the injury, but it's going to have a huge impact on everybody around around that individual. And so a family treatment model is important in working with individuals living with brain injury. And hopefully we can move them into that independent living where they're able to execute activities of daily living on their own with minimal supports. That is the goal. However, diagnosis becomes a very difficult feat for these folks. And so when we look at diagnosing brain injury, typically it's going to get diagnosed in that acute hospital setting. And they're going to use things like a CT scan to identify the bleeding in and around the brain, any type of brain swelling or skull fractures and lesions. As firefighters and paramedics, you guys are probably doing the initial assessment before we even get them to a hospital. And so make sure you're looking at those pupils and asking questions about cognitive functioning to these individuals, because it starts with you guys. Then we get things like an MRI. An MRI is one of the best imaging for brain injury because it can detect minute bleeding or microhemorrhages as long as it's post-injury. Small areas of bruising or scarring can also be visible on an MRI. Now, functional MRIs are going to provide us with an indirect measure of neuronal activity, and it does have the potential to reveal changes in brain functioning. You see a lot of these functional MRIs done in veteran settings. They're starting to do something called brain mapping, and we have a great doctor here in Albuquerque, Dr. Davin Quinn, that does some great work with veteran services and research with UNM hospitals, along with Dr. Bill Shuttleworth, Richard Campbell, and several others that do look into advancing our medical care here in New Mexico. Now, some of the ways we measure severity of brain injuries include the Glasgow Coma Scale, which you're probably very familiar with. This is a neurological assessment that's going to objectively measure the level of consciousness following head injury. This assessment tool looks at things like eye-opening, verbal and motor response, and it's going to categorize head injuries into 5 levels, 1 being death, vegetative states. The second, we'll focus on 3, which is moderate, severe, or mild injuries, and that's where community life is affected for these individuals. We also look at loss of consciousness, which is the amount of time a person has been unconscious following an injury. And then post-traumatic amnesia, which is going to measure the state of confusion immediately following the injury. This is how we get a person's severity of disability into categories that we can understand and work with. And so 75% of head injuries fall into the mild category, where there's loss of consciousness for less than 30 minutes. Very frequently, there's not a loss of consciousness. If you've ever had your bell rung or seen that flash of light, you've probably experienced a mild head injury. When we look at the Glasgow Coma Scale, they're going to fall on the higher end of this, between 13 and 15. A person may experience some post-traumatic amnesia, usually lasting less than 24 hours, where they can't remember what happened right before or maybe right after the injury. With kids car surfing, you probably deal with a lot of those experiences with these individuals. Families that aren't educated on these types of injuries may sit in a hospital setting for 4 to 6 hours to make sure there's not any of those post-concussive symptoms that occur, and then the teenager might be released back home. Where normal teenage behavior, we're going to notice a little defiance, impulsivity, where that mild brain injury may actually impact that child after high school into college. They may not be able to keep up with the curriculum. They may not be able to engage in competitive employment. And it may be a result of a mild head injury they obtain at 16 that doesn't have an impact until they're 22, 23 years old. 'old. 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 there may be some of those post-concussion symptoms. A lot of individuals end up going home and then a day later start experiencing severe headaches that then take them to their primary care, which we looked at the scans earlier. A CT scan may not necessarily identify any type of hemorrhage or contusions going on in that brain. Typically, they're scheduled out once you leave the hospital. And so it's important to give enough information to individuals that you interact with so that way they can go and self-advocate within the medical system and that system of care. With moderate injuries, a person's going to be in a coma for more than 30 minutes, but less than 24 hours. When we do the Glasgow assessment, they're going to fall between 9 and 12. You may see some possible skull fractures with bruising or bleeding, and those signs of damages can be seen on CT scans, MRIs, and EEGs. There may be some long-term problems in one or more areas of life, and they may be very subtle changes a person may experience, or it may be very pronounced. It depends. I've never met the same brain injury twice. When we look at severe injuries, a person's going to be in a coma longer than 24 hours. It often lasts days or weeks. Very frequently in a medical setting, it will be induced coma to prevent the confusion and disorientation the person experiences and prevent that pulling out of tubes and trying to kind of run away like a deer caught in headlights. And so very frequently you'll see medical personnel actually sedate the person to prevent that and stabilize life and slowly take them out of the coma within weeks, sometimes months. Glasgow Coma Scale for these folks is at the lower end. They fall between a 3 and an 8. And may progress and go backwards throughout their acute care setting and post-acute setting. You're going to see bruising and bleeding in the brain. There may even be signs of dead tissue within the brain. You're going to see that damage on EEG, CT, or MRIs, and there's going to be some long-term impairments in one or more areas of life. Now, when we deal with co-occurring disorders, you see less depression in a severe brain injury than you're going to see in a mild head injury. Mild head injuries often appear as kind of schizoaffective type disorders and are often diagnosed as a mental health condition and very infrequently seen as a head injury. And so supports the long-term effects of a mild brain injury can often be more severe than the long-term effects of a severe brain injury once you get that medical stability in play. Now, when we look at the impact that it has on a person, we can look at several different functional assessments that can be used. And so you can see the functional independence measure is going to be the most widely accepted functional assessment in the rehab community. The one that we see used quite a bit here in New Mexico is the Disability Rating Scale, which is an 8-item assessment of impairment, disability, and handicap or participation. You get the Rancho Los Amigos level of cognitive functioning scale is going to be a clinical tool that's used to rate how people with brain injury are recovering. And in a post-acute neuro rehab setting, that's what's used consistently across the board in neuro rehab centers like Craig Hospital, Neurorestorative, Tier Memorial. You might see things like that in their post-acute setting. We also have the Mayo Portland Adaptability Inventory, and this is a clinical evaluation tool designed for the post-acute care. This is one of the tools that we use within ARCA ABI to develop a person's goal and outcome plan to help take them where they're at and move them through the rehab process. Some other ones that you might see are the World Health Organization Quality of Life Scale. This one's a little bit lengthy. It's got a 100-question scale developed for cross-cultural use. Now, this one's hard for me because a person with the brain injury has a very difficult time with attention and memory, and so asking a bunch of questions can exhaust the person. And so anytime you're doing assessments like this, you always want to have natural support networks around to help you get a better look at that individual. A neuropsych assessment is one of the most expensive assessments that you're going to do, but it's the tool that's going to give you where the person's functioning is at and what we can do to help support them build those cognitive skills that they're going to need to move independently through life. Now, when we look at these assessments, it's important for us to understand where the person's at, what the deficits are. Now, here in New Mexico, we focused a lot of time on, when we work with disabilities, we've looked at a lot of developmental disabilities and focusing on a person's abilities. When we're working with somebody dealing with a brain injury, we do want to maximize on the deficit. That's where our focus is going to go, in teaching these individuals how to navigate the world around them, how to move through their community, how to engage in those interpersonal relationships that they experience in life. Because brain injury will have an impact on their cognitive functioning. So you're going to see some cognitive impairments, things like their daily activities of living, hygiene, eating, household management. You get a lot of individuals with mild brain injury that look like they may have issues with hoarding, when in fact that injury may have impacted their processing system, and they're not able to move through the clutter because they don't know what is valuable information and what is invaluable, right? Think about how much junk mail you get on a regular basis. You get things like memory impairments, which affect a person's ability to learn, retain, and use new information. You get executive functioning impairments, right? And anytime you're dealing with frontal lobe injuries, you're going to see how this works. It'll impact the person's ability to plan, initiate, direct, and monitor their own activities. Again, observable behavior is going to look like a mental health illness and not necessarily a cognitive deficit or a break in that functioning, right? When you think about cognitive functioning, we actually have 6 domains of cognitive functioning that we utilize. So you have attention, categorization, memory, processing speed, executive functioning, and your metacognition that all come into play, and they kind of work together, some independently, others jointly. And so when you look at the 2 different hemispheres and the 4 lobes, you throw in your cerebellum and your hindbrain, and those injuries can have an impact on a bunch of this functioning level and moving through life that we deal with. You can see speech and language impairments, sensory motor impairments. We often see behavioral and emotional changes. It may be lack of awareness of the individual. It may be society's lack of awareness on this disability, and it may be a combination of both. And then you often see things like substance abuse. I call this self-medicating. A person does this to kind of numb themselves out. I have several individuals that will tell you, I'm in here, I just don't come out there the way I want to. And so the way they say things, the way they do things may be a little more pronounced than they would like them to be. Maybe they go down the rabbit hole. I have one lady that I work with that we have 4 different conversations every time I work with her, and we make a little progress on each one of them. But she's asked me, can you please tell me not to go down the rabbit hole so we can get some work done? Now, when we're working with these folks, as adults, it's very difficult for us to redirect another adult without feeling like we're being abrasive or rude. But folks with brain injuries will actually ask you, can you please help me? and keep me in line in the conversation or on the task. Write instructions down for me so you don't get frustrated in telling me. And so when injuries happen in certain areas of the brain, you're going to see certain deficits in these areas of functioning. And it should be expected that you see these cognitive deficits. And so I want to look at the occipital lobe, right? With the occipital lobe, and when there's damage to this lobe, you've got to think of vision, right? Occipital lobe is gonna control all of your visual perception. It's the center of vision. And so when there's damage to this, you're gonna see defects in the way their eyes move. They may not be able to keep the eyes together, and so you have convergence difficulty. You may have difficulty in locating objects in the environment, identifying colors. There may even be a production of hallucinations that if you're talking to a psychiatrist, you may have some other mental health illnesses going on. You look at visual illusions, where a person inaccurately sees different objects, right? Have you ever woke up and you've seen those floaters in your eyes because you're kind of dehydrated? I have a guy that I work with that always sees somebody standing in his peripheral vision. And it's not that somebody's there, it's that his vision centers don't move in that way. You see word blindness or the inability to recognize words. Words may kind of float off the page. Lights might actually impact a person's ability to locate objects. A person may have difficulty in recognizing or drawing objects, an inability to recognize movement of an object, which can impact driving and independent skills like that, right? Even cooking can be impacted when there's damage to that visual perception center. And then difficulties with reading and writing. Now, if you think of it that way, right? Difficulty with reading and writing. If you're an avid reader, imagine hitting your head hard enough that you can no longer read those books you enjoy reading. So not only is there going to be a deficit in your visual perception, but you're also going to go through the emotional fatigue of not being able to do what you used to do. And that can become a vicious cycle, right? When emotion goes up, cognition goes down. And so when a person does have damage to the occipital lobe, some supports you want to look at are like neuro-ophthalmology. Okay, I say neuro-ophthalmology because a regular ophthalmologist isn't going to notice the convergence deficits. They're looking at the structure of the eye and the way that works. Neuro-ophthalmology looks a little bit closer at the functioning and processing of the visual centers. And so places like New Mexico Eye Associates will have a neuro-ophthalmologist on board. And then Envision actually does what's called vision therapy and works with eye acuity and prism glasses, shaded glasses that can actually reduce a person's emotional charge, in turn increasing that cognitive functioning. You also want to look at things like occupational therapy, right? Learning how to adapt to your new way of living. When we look at the temporal lobe and there's damage to this area, your temporal lobe is gonna control your hearing ability, your memory acquisition, and some of your visual perception as well, and categorization skills. And so when this is damaged, you may have difficulty recognizing faces. You may have difficulty understanding spoken words. Wernicke's area is kind of on the side of your head here. So is Broca's area, and Broca's area is also in this temporal lobe. And when you impact Broca's area, you actually have broken speech, and a person kind of puts a bunch of words into a bowl, and you end up hearing gibberish when it comes out. But what they're actually understanding internally is a full dialogue with you. Sometimes by giving this person a dry erase board and a dry erase marker and having them write what they're saying. This is one of the reasons brain injury is one of my favorite disabilities to work with, because what goes on in there compared to what's coming out could be two completely different things. And a simple dry erase board and a marker can change a person's life entirely and help them move through their community and in their interpersonal relationships in a healthy manner. You may see disturbances with selective attention, difficulty with identifying and verbalizing different objects. You may see some short-term memory loss, interference with the long-term memory. We often see where a person's short-term memory is impacted, but not long-term. They remember everything that used to happen. If you ever saw 50 First Dates, that's kind of what's going on here. Increase or decrease interest in sexual behavior. Following head injuries in post-acute neurorehab setting, we do see a lot of inappropriate sexual behavior as a result of injuries to this temporal lobe that may make staff uncomfortable if they aren't educated on how this works and what's going on. Also, right lobe damage can cause persistent talking. This is where the lady I work with goes through 4 different conversations. And so by reminding her and helping her work on that neuroplasticity over time, she may get that skill set because of the way the brain has the ability to rewire. But everybody's got to be consistent. In neurorehab, we build a plan based on consistency. And so very often we're making teams out of nothing here in New Mexico and doing a lot of warm handoffs to help these people transition through. There may also be an increase in aggressive behavior. And so some of the supports you want to look at are maybe a speech and language pathologist, right? UNM has a great speech and hearing department. You have Dr. Jessica Richardson, who is a research doc over there, and she has helped develop something called NeuroChoir, which helps people dealing with these deficits kind of reintegrate those speech skills. Then you get Lori Ross Brennan and Associates that does a lot of work with auditory integration therapy and things like that. And then, of course, your neuro-ophthalmology and your occupational therapy would also come into play. When we look at the parietal lobe, which is kind of on the top, you have 2 different areas there, but I won't get into both of them. This is where your location of visual perception, touch, goal-directed voluntary movements, manipulation of objects, integration of different senses that allow the understanding of a single concept, right? For me to know the room's nice and cool, a little darkened. That's where all of that functioning is coming from and putting together the presentation you see happening in front of you. When you have damage to this area, you may see the inability to attend to more than one object at a time, inability to name objects, inability to locate the words for writing. You may have problems with reading, right? This is called alexia. So think about Alexa that you use. You talk to it, right? And so just a little bit of back information. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to brain injury. I like to look at different concepts. You get difficulty with drawing objects, distinguishing left from right, difficulty doing math. Sometimes even just the angles of things can have a huge impact on a person's emotional feelings that cause that cognition to drop. You get lack of awareness of certain body parts or surrounding spaces that leads to difficulties in self-care. And so you see a lot of folks with brain injury, their social interactions are impacted. Maybe they get too close to somebody. They don't have that spatial distance that the rest of the world does, right? That filter's gone. And then maybe difficulty with eye and hand coordination. So for these folks, you want to look at things like physical therapy, work on dexterity, different things like that with occupational therapy, speech and language pathology, and then again that neuro-ophthalmology. All systems work together, and so different areas are going to require more supportive structures be put in place. Now, the frontal lobe, this is one of the most severe injuries to have to live with, right? Because frontal lobe is the area of the brain that helps us know we know what we are doing without our environment, how we initiate activity in response to our environment, judgments that we make about what occurs in our daily activities. It controls our emotional response, our expressive language, assigns meaning to the words that we choose, involves word association, memory for habits and motor activities. Our personality comes from our frontal lobe. Our executive function comes from our frontal lobe. A lot of our safety skills and safety mechanisms come from our frontal lobe. So I want you to think about your teenager, and as they're moving through their teenager years and some of the irrational behavior they choose, the impulsive behaviors they choose, frontal lobe is the last lobe that's going to develop in that growing brain. And that develops through the age of, they say 22, I'm going to push at least 26. I'm still growing, and I'm not that young, so I say frontal lobe, it's constantly developing and moving over time, right? That's where awareness might come from. That's where all that knowing comes from. And so when there's damage, you may have loss of simple movement of various body parts, inability to plan a sequence of complex movements that are needed to complete multi-step tasks, all that sequencing stuff. Loss of spontaneity in interacting with others, loss of flexibility in thinking, persistence of a single thought, perseverance or perseveration that a person may just get stuck on. They want to get into new housing program, but they're not able to initiate that move and continue fighting within their housing situations to better it without making moves. I deal with a lot of folks that have dealt with homelessness that are dealing with that persistence of a single thought. Then inability to focus on a task, a lot of emotional ability where it's hot and it's cold multiple times a day, sometimes multiple times an hour. Changes in social behavior, personality, difficulties with problem solving, and the inability to express language, right? I talked about Broca's aphasia earlier. Now, some strategies when working with these folks, they're going to need a little bit more intensive supports, right? So case management, intensive community supports. These folks, I usually recommend families get care coordination and community support workers to help them navigate the day-to-day things like filling out that housing application. You may need a neuropsychologist to let us know where is this person's functioning. You definitely need counseling services and psych services underneath them to help them learn how to process through their world. And then, of course, things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language pathology, and neuroophthalmology also comes into play. Now, because services for brain injury are lacking here in New Mexico, we have to work extra hard to develop teams out of what we have available. And so having good supports behind you can make a world of a difference. And so you want to make sure there's a primary care involved that is knowledgeable with the impact of brain injury. Oftentimes, natural support networks or paid staff can help advocate. There's a big difference in me initiating a call and setting up an appointment than it is for a person with the brain injury having to do that on their own. They may show signs of frustration, irritability, even over the phone. Their lack of understanding requires the support of an external memory to help them get through. A good neurologist that knows how brain injury can have an impact for a person. Oftentimes neurology will prescribe the seizure medications, whereas the primary care might prescribe the vitamins a person takes. Neuropsychology and counseling services are imperative for all people living with brain injury. And then intensive care coordination, that community support worker, hopefully a life skills coach, family education, and counseling for the family and supports around them too, because this is a disability that doesn't go away with the pill. This is a disability that's going to be in play, and as transitions happen in life, a person may go backwards. A person may be stable for years, and something like the COVID pandemic sends them 20 years in reverse. And so it's an ongoing support network that we have to create. When we look at the state of brain injury services in New Mexico, we have one of the top trauma units in the nation over at UNM. You also have some post-acute services. They're very limited, but you have about 5 rehab hospitals in the state, and they usually provide a wide range of rehab services, and the level of specialization regarding brain injury is going to be lower than comparable institutions in Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, California, even Arizona. The Barrows, I just did a webinar with the Barrows Institute in Arizona, and some of the work they're doing with domestic violence populations is amazing. The specialized long-term and community-based rehab is a service that's very limited in the state of New Mexico. The first time I did this presentation, we had nothing. And so we're slowly making progress on that. And then you get the limited pool of professionals that are trained in providing support for people with brain injuries. You get the lack of infrastructure and minimal collaboration between entities working with this population. It's very taxing. So even a lot of your care coordinators, case managers that have a person living with a brain injury on their caseload, my regular intake with somebody at a counseling agency might take an hour, whereas working with somebody with a brain injury is going to take me about 2.5 to 3 hours. So it's time constraints that also strain these individuals on their outcomes. And there's a clear disconnect between funding that's available through Centennial Care, commercial insurance, workers' comp, and other private funding sources and the available services found in the state. Training and education is a big piece. I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I'm one of the first certified brain injury specialists in the state. We're still working on this. The national certification programs for both direct care and professional staff are available through the Brain Injury Association of America, Academy of Certified Brain Injury Specialists. Currently in New Mexico, we have about 46 certified specialists and about 4 trainers that you find in different areas. We actually rank 42 in the United States in the number of certified brain injury specialists. If you look at Nevada, which is our equivalent in population and size of our state and all of those components that come into play, you're looking at them having over 400 certified brain injury specialists, from case management all the way to neurologists, that have the skill set in dealing with brain injury. Now, just because we have a neurologist doesn't mean they have the skill set in dealing with the long-term impact of brain injury, and that's where certified brain injury specialists are important within the community. And so ARCA ABI does offer CBIS certification. If you know anybody that's interested or you yourself want to pursue that, my contact information will be at the end of this slideshow, and you guys can reach out to me and I'll help get you connected to that program. Now, some of the available brain injury services and resources in New Mexico are going to include the New Mexico Brain Injury Service Fund program. This program offers short-term services to New Mexicans living with acquired brain injury, both traumatic and non-traumatic injuries. This is a program that's directed to folks that do not have access to long-term Medicaid services, who have that crisis need and have a brain injury diagnosis. It's not an income-based program, but if you are a person with full Medicaid benefits, you will not qualify for this program because it falls under the Human Services Department. And so if you do have an MCO through Centennial Care, we want to go through that MCO to get care coordination and community support workers involved in managing the care of this patient. Under the Brain Injury Services Fund, some of the services that are offered are that service coordination, life skills coaching, and crisis interim services like neuroacupuncture, maybe massage therapy, professional organizer to help teach you that skill set to those that are eligible in New Mexico. Then you get the New Mexico Brain Injury Resource Center, and this is kind of a one-stop shop. It's one of the only clubhouse models in the nation. There's about 3 other ones across the nation. And this is where families across the state can reach out and get information as to how to navigate the medical system or insurance systems, or how to apply for things like Social Security and get the resources they need and connections to get to those agencies that are assisting with these programs. Services through the Resource Center include that information and referral. There is a library built for families, professionals, and individuals. And then outreach is also a big component of the Resource Center. So you'll often see the Resource Center at a lot of your disability conferences, kind of pushing information about brain injury. Contact information for the Resource Center is there on your screen. Some other organizations within the state include the Brain Injury Alliance of New Mexico. This helps individuals living with brain injury and community learn about brain injury and gives resources to help cope with the effects of brain injury. They also run weekly community meetings, especially now during COVID. You have a lot of support groups that are linked up. You can find that information with the Resource Center as well. Then you get the New Mexico Brain Injury Advisory Council. Now, the Advisory Council sits under the Governor's Commission on Disability, and their primary goal is to change legislation and services within the state, do a lot of research on what's needed within the state. And so they advocate for the development of a statewide system of comprehensive community-based resources that are going to maximize personal choices and functional independence of persons with brain injury, along with promoting prevention of head injuries. So they run a free child safety helmet program where you're able to get a free helmet for children under the age of 18, since New Mexico is a state that requires our adolescents to wear a helmet when on a bicycle. We still have a long ways to go before we require helmets used by motorcyclists, which is probably one of our larger areas of head injury across the state. Some of the rehab hospitals that you'll find are UNM's Carrie Tingley Hospital that works with a lot of our youth. Encompass Health Rehab Hospital, they have some of those certified brain injury specialists on staff, as does Loveless and UNM's Rehab Hospital. Then you get New Mexico Rehab Center out in Roswell, San Juan Rehab Hospital out in Farmington. There are some support groups connected to them, as well as Christus St. Vincent's in Santa Fe that has some stroke support groups and networks. And then the Advanced Care Hospital of Southern New Mexico out in Las Cruces. Now, here in the metro area, you have ARCA's ABI community-based brain injury functional rehab. And this is where we have developed an acquired brain injury. You know, ARCA has been known for years at working with people with developmental disability, and we took the opportunity to branch out and build services for individuals within our community living with brain injury. And we now have 2 community-based treatment facilities that offer neuro rehab supports in a residential setting for individuals whose insurance will do those contracts to directly get that level of care. Their rehab model provides post-acute community-based residential supported living services, in-home services, and community integration services for people with brain injury. And you can contact Kay Elridge, who is also a CBIS certified staff and the ABI operations coordinator, for information on referrals to get into that program. Some of the services that are offered include employment supports, in-home supports, personal care services, adult treatment, residential rehab services, community reintegration services, and a thing that you don't see here is family education on brain injury. And so if after this presentation you guys have any questions, or you want to have a conversation about someone that you are working with or have experienced and want to know how you can better help support that individual, please do give me a call. My name's Crystal Cantu, and you can reach me at 505-243-3835, or you can email me at cantu@arcaspirit.org. Thank you for giving me your time today.